Welcome back, fellow horror geeks, to 100 Days of Horror. And I cannot believe it's been 260 something days since Halloween of last year, in which we finished up the 100 days of movies that we haven't seen leading up to the holiday. But of course we watch horror movies year round here at City of Geek, and I'm sure you do too if you watch this channel. But I love watching all these ones that we haven't seen shoved into such a small period, much to my wife's annoyment and my amusement. I know it's been a hot minute since my last video. I think the last one was Fantasy Island back in February, and now it's July, and I'm sorry about that. Things, with quarantine, and I started grad school and all this, so it took up a lot of time. But hopefully now with this, as I did last year, I'll keep up on it, putting out reviews every day or so based upon my ability to watch, write, edit, and put out. Last year I actually put the last video in December, but I did finish in time. Actually finished a couple weeks early. But enough about that. If you're watching us for the first time, here's the basic setup of 100 Days of Horror, started by our own Kim Douthit of City of Geek and Horror Honeys and a bunch of other places. Ghoulish Tendencies podcast, check her out there. Myself, Kim, Cody, Tony still in 2016, and a bunch of other people watch 100 horror films they haven't seen, write about them, and post them up onto a Facebook group, which you can follow the link down below, and I'll put the thing right here, even though this doesn't link over, because I definitely don't have enough subscribers in order to do that. Speaking of which, you should do that. Maybe it will by the end. And then I take those and I put them up on cityofgeek.com. So if you can follow along at cityofgeek.com to see what everyone else is writing about, or on the Facebook, or both, because the Facebook you comment and read people's comments and that, and the City of Geek page is literally just the movies. So this is a highly interactive thing, so if you want to be involved, watch movies, post them up there. Even if you can't do, as I said, Tony's still in 2016, so if you want to pop in occasionally and write what you write, please do. We always like to see new movies, see new suggestions, and I love hearing what other people think about movies that I love, hated, or what have you. And this video also services as a seen them all, something I used to do but then didn't have the time to follow up on after spending hours and hours and hours on Pink Panther. I have like 2 views. I know we don't do these reviews, but also that was a lot of work that didn't come out, so I kind of got bored with it after a couple of goes, which I'll watch an entire series and post about each of those entries. Kim did that a couple times on Horror Honeys. You can check that out. I think she might have reposted that on the one that she did for Silent Night, Deadly Night onto City of Geek, but check out horrorhoneys.com and find out what she did there. But in this case, we're looking at the series of Species movies, and I'm doing this review after watching the first 2, and then I'll check in with mini reviews after 3 and 4. I'm going to try and keep all these short. If you want to know more details, or I can write some further, hit me up at 100 Days of Horror City of Geek, and I can go into that detail, and they might cover slightly different information than what I'm talking about here, because what I write and what I talk about could be 2 different sheets of thought, right? But Species 1 came out in 1995, and it's a movie that I'm really surprised I hadn't seen till now. It came out when I was 13 years old, and it's, a gooey science fiction horror film, lots of boobies. So you think at 13-year-old me, who had complete control over the rental card from Blockbuster and Movie Palace or whatever the hell was around me, that I think I would definitely rent it at that point, since we went out with my friends doing the 575 deals. Somehow I've always missed it. Never got around to it until now. It's written by Dennis Feldman, directed by Roger Donaldson, and it's what it is. It's a mid-90s science fiction action horror film with the mid-budget. It's kind of a small film ultimately, but it's enough to bring people in, have people talk about it, but it's not a world changer. It's a B-level science fiction movie that maybe do well on sci-fi in the afternoon. This happens to get this A-list cast of people on the way up, people on the way down, people kind of middling along, to give it an extra elevation that it wouldn't have if it was made directly for sci-fi, which I think the last 2 of them were. I don't know, I'll get to that when the time comes. That cast includes Natasha Henstridge in her very first role, Michelle Williams from Dawson's Creek in one of her first roles, both playing Syl when she's younger and then she's older. Alfred Molina, who's been around for about 12 years at the point, but still hadn't quite became the known name. And we also have Michael Madsen, coming off of a couple Quentin Tarantino movies, but his career was kind of at that point, and definitely for the same thing for Ben Kingsley, who has been probably coasting on Gandhi forever. I'm sorry, Ben, but you have. And Forrest Whitaker, who was always a delight to see. Basic plot is the following. We have Ben Kingsley, who leads up a group of scientists, and they create a human-alien hybrid based upon details they got coming from SETI. When they sent out a message, they got it back, and they used that details that was created to create life. But there's some holes in there, just like Jurassic Park. Instead of filling in for frogs, they fill in with human DNA, so they create Syl. So played by Natasha Henstridge when she gets older, and Michelle Williams when she is younger. And then they realize that, okay, we're gonna kill her for whatever reason. When she realizes it's gonna happen, she breaks out and it goes on the loose at the same time as she grows up and her sex drive starts to begin. So she has the feeling that she needs to procreate, so she starts meeting up with men and ultimately killing them, getting mixed in the act, and their whole thing of Ben Kingsley, one of the other scientists, and a team of mercenaries, or a team of people they hired to bring it all together, including Alfred Molina, Forrest Whitaker, a couple other people along the way, to hunt down and kill Syl before she replicates and her species takes over the world. Species, there's the title. That was a very generic title. It could have been anything. And for that, it's a lot of the same thing again and again. She goes to one location, meets a guy. As she starts to get to the point that she's going to have sex with him, she realizes that the other people are catching up to her, and she takes off. And it happens again and again and again. But strange enough, it doesn't really get tiring with that. It happens just enough times that it begins that interest. But it does have that weird notion that these guys, this team of people, once again, there's this team of people, too many of them, because there's like a zillion people around, probably a couple of characters could have been shoved back together to make less. But hey, if you can get all these great people in your cast, might as well cast them. Gives more names to the poster, gives a little more push for it. So if you get Ben Kingsley, who probably just need to make a house band of some sort. But they all show up just after time, which that's kind of like, alright, we need to get something. We need to get something somewhere moving with this. But there's enough going on where Natasha Henstridge is playing completely from Syl as completely from instinct, which is a nice touch. There isn't a lot to her character other than that, but it's cool to see how a creature that looks like it's human but really is more alien is using what it knows to get where it needs to go forward. That's all this like, this primal animal instinct, or in this case alien animal instinct, driving her to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. Though I would have liked to have a little bit of maybe her being slightly aware, kind of like fighting against that nature. Something actually the next movie we'll get into, but I'll get to that when I get to the next movie. But none of the set pieces are all that big. It's obviously filmed for not a lot of money. It did make, I'm not sure what the budget was. I looked up, I think it's like $6 million. Rather relatively small, even for 1995. Which unfortunately does strike back against it, because everything looks like, they're using small sets or found locations. So you never get something big and mind-blowing, or like really wowing, but you do get enough interest. You get it to be, like I said, it's a B movie with A-listers. So it does everything it can with that concept. The creature design ultimately from H.R. Geiger is great. It's very Geiger. Like if you've seen any of his drawings, you see that. And if you saw that in Alien, like, I think it's the same dude. If you didn't already know it was Geiger. It does have the mid-90s bad CG, which doesn't really hold very well. Tentacles, and with mostly coming from tentacles and some of the creature movements. But it's definitely an enjoyable film. It's nothing I'm like, oh man, I wish I saw that, when it came out. I think teenage me would have liked it a lot more than 38-year-old me. But I did have a good time. It's what it is. It's a B-level science fiction, done pretty decently, with good people, with some pretty decent effects. And yeah, there we are. Species 2 came out in 1998 and does continue several of the cast members from the first film, but a completely new writing and directing team. The writing is taken up by Chris Belconte, who's written a bunch of television shows. This is the only thing that he's written as it came out as a film, a couple of TV movies. But he did a couple of episodes of Hannibal and X-Files and 90210 and a whole lot of things. It looks like a lot of TV in his career. And then this is actually directed by Peter Medic, who's best known for the 1980 Changeling, one of the scariest horror films of all time. And if you haven't seen that, that'd be a great entry for your 100 Days of Horror, which I'm not going to get into how much of that movie and why it works and the story behind it, but just to note that it's absolutely fantastic. Unfortunately, this is nowhere near the controlled terror-a-thon that is The Changeling, but this isn't really a bad movie. I know it is the hot take because this has an 18 on Metacritic, and it's from the reviews are on IMDb and what I can see of the reviews on Metacritic, it's really hated compared to the 49 that the first one got, which is kind of like, okay. but I kind of enjoyed this one a lot more. It's definitely not as well made as a movie. It's that you can see, you know, its cheapiness a little bit more. There's a lot of scripting issues, of ideas that are brought up that aren't really paid off very well, that a better writer probably could have done to a better degree. I'll get into those in just a second. But I actually had a lot of fun. I thought that was a little tighter, it's a lot gorier, a lot more effects, a lot less bad CG, though there is still some, and a lot more practical effects of pretty interesting designs. And this time, of course, we get multiple creatures, which is always cool. We do have, so we have 3 of the cast members coming back. Natasha Henstridge, Michael Madsen, and Marge Hergenberger. I wrote down the name, I think, Phil. I'm not going to go back and fix it. Who was in the first film, too, and I feel bad I didn't mention her because she's kind of one of the main characters, who becomes definitely more of the main character this time, as a surviving scientist from the first team, which they've recreated Syl, now called Eve, and now they know how to keep care of her better. And we only see her as an adult this time, being kept care for, but keeping men out of her way so she doesn't get testosterone, so she becomes on her own. And of course, Eve, we do have, you know, mother of a new species, because we do have a male version of it this time, in the form of an astronaut who went to Mars with 2 other astronauts, and they breathe in space dust that contains the DNA of the species that Syl is made out of, or Eve is made out of. But here's the interesting thing for that, is that they know something's wrong with them. They feel that something has changed on the way back from Mars. They blank out for 9 minutes, they wake up, and then they only activate the alien part when they get sexually aroused. But they have the feeling that something's going wrong with them. Patrick is the main one of those astronauts, and that's an interesting concept there. That's something I mentioned in the first movie where I wish I had seen more of instead of just instinct. It's not really done in so much. It's more of an idea that's brought up, but they kind of dropped away. It's meant to create, ultimately the idea of that is, so he has a little conflict with his dad, a senator played by James Cromwell. Sweet Jesus. It's a requirement that you have to do that with James Cromwell. Sorry, First Contact. But we also have the concept, one of the other concepts that was brought up and not really paid off, is they're using Eve to find out where Patrick and the other astronauts are when they get aroused and their alien side starts to come out. She gets that feeling, so she knows where they're at, she's able to track them. And I thought we could maybe like a T2 sort of thing here, in which like she's actually out there and they keep beating up, and but she's actually, that part doesn't really come into, though she's getting those feelings, her being active part of the plot doesn't really come into about 70 minutes out of the 90-minute movie, leading into a very quick climax of species. But if that aspect was worked on a little bit more and expanded on, that could have been a more interesting film. So we do have a lot of repeated scenes of astronaut, meets someone, gets aroused, she gets the feeling, monster attacks. So we have a lot of repetition of that, and we saw that a lot in the first film. This time with a little more blood and a little more gore. A lot of practical effects, as I said. There's more, the tentacles that we see are a lot more practical. There are a couple bad CG ones, including some bad CG fire in the climax. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I don't know what the hatred is, why it has that 18. It's competently shot. It's decently well performed. It's got, good gore. Like I said, the script is lesser than it should be, but I definitely did not have a bad time watching it. But I came into it expecting to find just pure shit. This one went theatrical, but like still kind of feeling a direct-to-video sequel to an already mid-grade movie. Think it's going to go downhill from here. But yeah, maybe because my expectations were low, I did have a good time. Now I'm gonna check out Species 3 and see where this goes. And we're back with Species 3, which came out in 2004, and I believe was straight to video this time, and I can definitely see why, because this one was just awful. And as much as I enjoyed the first two, even with their flaws, this one has nothing at all to keep it interesting. At 1 hour and 52 minutes, it is the longest one by about 5 minutes of the 3 so far, and the least amount of stuff happens. It's slow, it's boring, it not only does not much happen, and moving away from the chase of the first 2 films, it's just, there's no sense of urgency. When you're moving from a chase movie to not chase movies, you're gonna lose that sense of urgency, and I understand that. But there's no real pressure, there's no real ease there's no feeling of like, oh, we need to move through this plot, we need to have something happen. There's not a lot of inciting moment. There's no inciting moment to really kind of get things going. plot-wise, this follows up right after Species 2, picking up immediately afterwards, with Eve being taken away from the scene. She gives birth and then dies. So Natasha Henstridge is listed in the credits, but it's kind of like the way that Adrian King was listed for Friday the 13th Part 2. In the opening sequence, dies. The rest of the movie has a different actress playing the half-breed from her own half-breed, who now wants to mate with someone else, and she's raised by an asshole college professor and his jerk of a assistant, and they kind of just, okay, cool, you know, we know what you want to do. And she's like, yeah, I want to do that too. And so she goes out at night, goes to try and find someone to mate with, but she's only looking for particular genetic strains, so she comes home empty-handed. And like, it's weird for something of previous times of like, we need to stop and catch these things. Now it literally wills itself to come home, or she wills herself to come home every night because she doesn't find what she's looking for. And that happens a couple more times there's a lot less deaths because there isn't the, oh, I need to mate with you and then I'm interrupted, so I need to kill you and move on. It's more of like, this guy hit on me and I said no, and I went home. There's a couple times where whoever hits on her moves a little further, and we do get some action death sequences with that. There's not a lot of those. There's not a lot of effects. There's not a lot of gore. There's some of the effects are pretty okay. There's a couple of CG ones that are really awful, like one CGI background and one scene that doesn't really come back at all. It's just a throwaway thing to set up something at the end, and it kind of doesn't work. I really kind of started zoning out a good chunk of the way through the film as nothing moved on. Mostly unlikable men are the leads here, with Sarah as the new Eve, shouting her lines, forcefully saying it. I didn't write down the actors. I didn't write anyone's names down because I don't really care, because no one was good in this. Everyone sucked. She was worst of all, but everyone's bland, except she put emotion to it, but it's just the same, emotion. Everyone else kind of like blah blah blah. Getting a paycheck, getting credit, and maybe moving on to something better. I don't remember anything else. It's written and directed by a couple people whose names I didn't write down because I didn't give a shit, because they didn't have done anything else. I looked at it briefly. They all did a couple TV works, and that's about it. So Species 3, not a good movie. On to Species 4. It's day 4, so I have watched Species 4, The Awakening. Luckily, this is the last one, so I'm not going to be like Species 100 at the very end, because thank God if these get worse, I don't know. Actually, I say worse, though. As of Part 3, this is bad, but wasn't like excruciatingly awful. Species 4 comes out about the same level as Part 3. Cheap, made for DVD, native video. It's directed by Nick Lyon, who doesn't have anything of note on his credits besides a whole lot of mockbusters, including some of those cheap Christmas movies that come out that Kim loves, and one episode of Z Nation, which is the one thing I really recognized on there. The writer is Ben Ripley, who wrote Part 3 as well, but he's more notable probably for writing Source Code from 2011 with Jake Gyllenhaal, which is actually a fantastic film. He also wrote the 2017 version of Flatliners, which was an utter piece of shit. Skip to the original, directed by Joel Schumacher, recently passed away Joel Schumacher, instead of the remake if you're looking at Flatliners, which is a pretty solid movie, the first one was. But that's not this. But this is Species 4, so we're going to talk about that. Do you remember back in 2000s when a lot of horror properties ended up in the hands of cheap producers who went off to Bulgaria and made a bunch of cheapy sequels, like the Hellraiser films, and Pumpkinhead did this as well, as we talked about in the Seen Them All. I think I mentioned that earlier in this series. This kind of feels like that, except for this time instead of being Bulgaria, this takes place in a shot in Mexico, featuring a lot of Mexican actors, and the Americans they got from LA to come down. Apparently the first people they cast, the acting is horrendous. It's either really bland or very, very forceful, including our main character, the new Eve, Sil, what have you, because it's disconnected from the previous ones. It gives a mention that this alien strain came in, but in this case we have a doctor who created a new one, raised her as a niece, so she has no idea she is a monster. And then when he starts to notice that she's starting to kind of die, he goes down to Mexico to find the person he created her with. That creates our plot there, because the other scientist has been secreting, sending off for good fun, a bunch of other half-breeds, including our main villain, who's a nearly silent woman who just as a nun at various points is meant to be very sexy, but she's not a good actress by any means. That really takes me out of it. I don't know, it's just me. And that's really about it. He's trying to figure out how to keep her alive, and she's starting to figure out her sexuality and this that, so we get plenty of boobs, we get plenty of seduction sequences, but like the third one, there isn't a lot of real pressure to move things through. It's kind of like, sure, it happens. Characters bicker, they argue, they obviously try to fill a lot of time because they don't have a lot of budget for the things that we came here to watch. Besides the boobs, if you're here for the boobs. But if you're here for the aliens, there's a couple of decent sequences. Some of the effects are pretty solid. A lot of bad effects, as has been for the series too. But it's kind of the same thing again. It does not bring anything new to what this is. Besides the nun one has like, can have things coming out of her arms like D23, like X23. But it looks like a cheap appliance. You see it bouncing around, so whatever for that. And on those appliances, this is the first time in the series where they actually have people in suits instead of using animatronics or CG for the alien versions of the people we're fighting. So they look pretty alright. So they look really stiff and stilted. It seemed like the people inside the suits didn't really know how to move in them, or the choreographer, if they have one at all, wasn't sure how to use them. That kind of looks really awkward, but they film it like with the humans and the aliens back and forth like it did in the previous films. So there's that in there. Ultimately this series was started out kind of bland. I want to call it Species a bad series. Just more of a meh. It doesn't really offer anything new. It's started as a mid-grade science fiction, mid-grade 90s sci-fi, and became a mid-grade 2000 sci-fi by the end. That mid-grade going from like a C+ to a C-. There's a world difference between those. The first two are much more watchable than the second two. So if you're going to watch any of these movies, just watch the first two and then call it a day, because you've seen nothing new when it comes to 3 and 4. And that's an interesting way, and that's a really bland way to start this year's 100 Days of Horror. It's always a crapshoot. Or get some good stuff or get some bad stuff. That's always a lot of the fun of it. I do have my list of movies I own but haven't watched from the genre. I'll look forward to popping a couple of those, so as long as what comes out new. Check out what's on Shudder, catching up on Joe Bob Briggs. There's a bunch in there I haven't seen. So I look forward to seeing where things go from here. If you're wanting to watch these videos as they come out, hit that subscribe and the bell so you can see those when these come up. It should be every day. Might be doing put a couple at a time, depending on time and the ability to edit and post. But there are the daily updates at the Facebook group, which you can follow the link below, or at citygeek.com if you just want the movies or what everyone is watching and the little paragraphs that everyone writes. But thank you for watching the Seen Them All and first 4 days, 100 Days of Horror for 2020. I really appreciate that. And if anything you think I should check out, send me a message, put a comment down there, and we'll see you for the next movie tomorrow.